Welcome to the smart community. Smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hi, smart community friends. It's Zoe here. I'm here to do an episode on my Churchill fellowship. I know I've been promising it for a while, but things have been going really well around here and I just haven't had the time to sit down and record this. But anyway, I'm here now and I'm really excited to share this with you. We're going to kind of go through my report. We're not going to go into all of the details. And then if you want to find my report, you can definitely find it if you search Zoe Ether Churchill Fellowship, and we'll also put the link in the show notes as well. So let's start by talking about smart mobility. It is Move-ember, after all, talking about all things moving from the old way of doing healthcare, for example, to new, the old way of doing things in local government to new. And also we're talking about mobility. So let's talk about smart mobility. What actually makes mobility smart? Well, on its own, I don't think it's mobility as a service. I don't think it's autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles or even flying taxis. It's actually an integrated network that makes the communities that we work, live and play more accessible, livable and sustainable for all. Does this include, those things that we just talked about, technology? It does. But without that integrated network, it's not very useful. So that's all well and good, but how do we actually do it? So from March to May this year, I went searching the globe to answer this very question. And did I find it? Well, I'll let you decide by the end of this episode. So I want to start with first why I care. If you haven't listened to the podcast before, welcome. Welcome to your first episode, and you just get to listen to me, which I don't know if that's good or bad, but anyway, I'll let you decide. Please go back and have a listen to some of the interviews or all of the interviews I've been doing. It's been very exciting. I love talking to people, particularly passionate people that really care about what they're doing in this space. But if you haven't listened or you don't know who I am, I want to tell you why I care. So in 2016, I lived in South Korea for 3 months, and this is where I learned about the smart city concept. And I came back and I was a bit obsessed with it, talking to anyone and everyone about it. And I couldn't really work out why or what the actual point was of this smart city thing. And although intriguing, I kept bringing it back to what problem are we actually trying to solve here? And what I realized is rather than it being a thing, it's actually a way of thinking, a framework of not doing things the way we've always done them. And then I realized it's not only about the city, it can't be only about the city, but it has to be about regional, rural, and remote areas. And I actually think even more so, because people in those areas and the areas themselves could really benefit from this thing quite significantly. So I started using the term smart community. And that's when I also realized it's not a thing per se. It's actually about people, the people around the table. It's about bringing people together that typically wouldn't have been in the same room to solve wicked problems. And then I realized the government must be active in this. Okay, so in 2018, I left my good secure job to start this podcast. And at the same time, I also applied for the Winston Churchill Fellowship. And at the time of applying, I thought I would research the sexy, shiny stuff like autonomous vehicles, flying taxis, etc., etc. But what I realized is what I'm actually passionate about is shifting the conversation from one led by technology to one that is about an integrated network that makes communities thrive. One that is about public good, which is enabled by mobility. So I looked at the current transport network in each place, what the pain points were, and what people are thinking or hoping for the future. So where did I go? I went to San Francisco, Mexico City, Toronto, Orlando, Denver, London, Dublin, Amsterdam, briefly to Copenhagen, Barcelona, Cape Town and Johannesburg, and Jeju Island and Seoul in South Korea. Around the world, we're all suffering from this common thread of problems in mobility. And what people spoke about the most? Congestion, pollution, population growth, connectivity for all, inefficiencies in public transport, and what I like to call the WTF. So here's a little bit about each. So congestion, obviously one of the number one things people are talking about, that there are too many people going to the same place at the same time. Now it's not the same kind of congestion in each place, but the single occupancy vehicle always has a part to play. Even though this seems obvious, it's both humbling and frightening to know that nowhere has fully solved this issue in 2019. And congestion is a symptom of an age where we focused the planning and expansion of our cities and towns to accommodate the use of the private car, even cities that were built pre-motor vehicle. Now, people's concern for congestion varies a great deal, ranging from accepting congestion as a universal urban truth to near outrage at the negative impacts it's having on our cities. And when I talk about this, when I've been talking since I've been back at conferences and things, particularly in regional areas, I realize that yes, congestion is a problem for the city, but we need to talk on a more holistic scale about our regional areas as well. And what does it mean for our regions when we do travel into the city? And that's where we have this congestion issue. But in the regions themselves, is congestion, something we want to be talking about or as our number one problem? So I've started talking more about these other things. So we've got pollution, which is closely linked to congestion, but also a range of other issues that are contributing to pollution. And it's a massive pain point throughout the world and increasing in importance globally. And in the case of pollution, no one is willing to accept the increasing levels of pollution and also the current state of the system. We're not willing to accept that. Everyone around the world is grappling with this issue, moving to cleaner, greener, and more sustainable options. However, the urgency, actions, and the solutions differ quite significantly. So the next one is population growth. As the population around the world continues to grow, the impacts and pressures on our current infrastructure also grows. Population growth is not an exclusive club. Most places around the world are feeling this. With a physical capacity set in most cities, the movements in these confines increase exponentially, compounding the issues of congestion and pollution. And on the other side of this, where there is space and room to grow, the need to still provide adequate, sustainable, and safe connection that meets the needs of the community is a challenge. Furthermore, affordable housing, sufficient employment, government services, entertainment, and community culture all need to be considered as we move into, or actually already in, this hyper-connected global society. So the next one is connectivity for all. The challenge of creating and maintaining an equitable and sustainable network within the existing and emerging constraints, physical, digital, and societal. And this is being discussed worldwide. Most of the current infrastructure was built in a time that does not match the needs of our current demand, ideologies, and community expectations that exist today, and have struggled to keep up with the changing nature of the demographics that are using the network. A more inclusive and accessible network to meet the needs of all current and arguably more importantly potential users is something that, although variables differ quite significantly, is a global issue to be addressed. The next one is inefficiencies in public transport, or rather an insufficient public transport network due to many, sometimes completely opposite reasons. And although the public transport network looks different in each cities, there are common threads of realities, challenges, and opportunities that are regularly a topic of discussion and debate. Okay, the last one in this category. So around the world, we're all thinking WTF. What's the future? Government, planners, industry, technology companies, academics, and citizens alike are all thinking about the future of mobility and their communities. They are hyper-aware of not wanting to create or let happen a world that is worse off than our current situation. No matter what the current situation is, we are all thinking about how we can improve the network and the state of play for us individually and as a collective. This includes talking about autonomous vehicles and connected infrastructure, zero-emission vehicles, and mobility as a service. And to a lesser but still significant effect, this also includes road user charging, walkability, integrating sustainable development goals, on-demand transport, new modes such as Hyperloop, and using data to improve the way we plan, operate, and maintain the system. Where governments are thinking regionally, they have a vision for the future, and if they're not leading, they are actively involved in this change, this is where we can see real benefits for the community, and these are being realized. This vision for the future will not be set in stone, but actually is quite flexible enough to adapt with the wave of change that is heading our way. Okay, so now we know what we are talking about. What aren't we talking about enough? What I think is missing from the smart mobility conversation is the messy bit in the middle between the technology and the business as usual of a community, a city, a town, or a region, the places that we work, live, and play, the real needs of the community. And this is the space we're going to play in. When you start talking about the real needs of the community, the conversation about the future of transport is very different to the one we've had in the past. There's a lot of talk about technology solving our problems. And in fact, I don't think you solve mobility because mobility is like life. It's complex. It changes. It looks different for everyone. People have different needs. And you don't solve life. You live it. And every day you try and make it better for you, your family, and your community. It's both humbling and frightening to know that around the world, we are all suffering with the complex issue of mobility. Now, some are definitely closer to smarter mobility than others. However, because it depends on so many different factors, it's really hard to judge one against the other. Before we go into the 7 key areas that I think we need to be talking about more, let's quickly mention data. Baseline data is absolutely essential to firstly, know what actions need to be taken. Secondly, be able to measure and monitor the impact of any action. Third, to change and pivot if required. And fourth, to put real information into the hands of the people. So from my fellowship, I identified 7 key areas that we aren't talking about enough. Now, these concepts in certain countries are topics that are front of mind and people are talking about quite a lot, but currently are only whispers on a global scale. So 7 key areas that need to be amplified in this smart mobility and smart community conversation. First, we have mobility as a system. So before we can have mobility as a service, we need to treat mobility as a system, where transport services run symbiotically with land use and accessibility to community needs, such as employment and services. An integrated system is joined up, accessible, safe, sustainable, and affordable for all, which also includes regional areas. The next is the status of mobility. A baseline is necessary to understand the current network and its real and perceived gaps. Qualitative and quantitative, so the stories and the numbers, are really important because these are both used to measure the impacts, negative and positive. The third is increasing convenient mobility. So this is reducing the need to travel by providing options for remote working, planning for urban migration, and decentralizing services where appropriate. This requires both cultural and technological changes. The next is regional mobility. By creating hubs and rethinking public transport and policy to enable connectivity across and between regions, we can enable housing affordability and reduce congestion and pollution by decreasing the need for people to get into their cars. The next is mobility for whom. We need to change the way that we're planning and who we're planning for. Traditionally, we plan for an able-bodied male businessman traveling to and from a centralized workplace. Women must be involved in mobility in the planning of our cities in both a professional capacity and as members of the community. Other considerations are increasing non-peak trips, catering for our aging population, and making sure that we're planning for the young and making it accessible. Think women with prams. We also need to consider wheelchair users in everything we plan for and the needs of groups whose voices may be marginalized in design. The next is holistic mobility. By comparing and sharing data across disciplines, we will better understand the places we are dealing with and those who need to access them. If smart mobility isn't used to address the challenges faced by marginalized communities, then it's not good enough. Joined-up government services are an important aspect of the future of our communities, and using technology to decrease the complexity in doing this. The last but not least is sustainable mobility. Smart mobility should address the UN's Sustainable Development Goals in both developed and developing countries. It is important that we share learnings across government so we don't keep piloting the same thing over and over again. Okay, these are the 7 key areas that I think we need to be talking about more. So I think I've spoken enough in this episode, and I will do a follow-up episode which we can dive deeper into these areas. Now, from these areas, I was able to develop a future-proof diagram. And then from that, taking the future-proof, what we want in the future, and looking at the 7 key areas, I made a framework. It's called the Way to Go framework, which we'll talk about in a later episode. So I'll leave it there. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Just a little bit of a snippet from my Churchill Fellowship. Now, if you do want to find my Churchill Fellowship, you can definitely search Zoe Ether Churchill Fellow. Hopefully it should come up, but we will put the link in the show notes as well. So that's all from me for now. Talk soon. I really hope you have a great day. And as always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.